Perfect. So it's great to see so many people on. I'm just going to give it another couple of minutes, guys, before we crack on. Just letting a few more into the room there. Hope everyone's ready to try some of the Spot range, or all the Spot range, should I say. Yeah. We're at the 50, we're at 12 coming in. So guys, what I'm going to do is put into the chat the running order, just to let you know, and you have them all ready. So I'll wait for a few more people to join. Now, just let the last couple of people in here now and we'll get started. Perfect. So welcome everyone to the first tasting from Celtic Whisky Shop. I'm Thomas, I work in the shop as one of the whiskey specialists there. And we're lucky enough tonight to, try a couple of whiskies that are now since out of stock. They're that popular, especially over Christmas. A lot of people would have bought their green, their yellow Spot, but we get to try the much fabled blue Spot and red Spot. So we have Ger Garland with us this evening. Hi, Ger. And he's the brand education and advocacy team manager at Irish Distillers. So he's going to take us through. As I put in there, we're going to start with the green Spot onto the yellow, then onto the Chateau Montolina, the Chateau Leoville Barton, onto the red Spot, and then finally blue Spot. Because as Ger has indicated, and it says on your bottle, it is cask strength. So that's the running order for this evening. So without further ado, there's a couple more people coming into the room. We'll let Ger crack on. Fire away, Ger.
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you to Celtic Whisky Shop for organising a great tasting. It's a lovely opportunity to try a range of whiskies that has been around now for the guts of 100 years. So the Spot range first appeared in the early 1920s, around 1921, and has been, basically we've reintroduced the full lineup of the range in recent years, culminating in blue Spot in 2020. So basically, originally there would have been a red, blue, green, and yellow, but green Spot was the only one that essentially survived. Like so many Irish whiskies, a lot of the other Irish whiskies in the range fell away over the decades because of the decline of the Irish whiskey industry. But by looking at how many people are on the call tonight, you can see that Irish whiskey is very popular again. Certainly for me, I'm working for Irish Distillers in my second decade. I started with them in September in 2001, and I've been in the drink industry now for 21 years. I'm working on the road since 1998. So I have a good bit of experience working with our whiskies, but I can certainly tell you, back when I started, there really was only a few whiskies that were readily available. And certainly out of pot stills, there was very few. There was Redbreast and there was Green Spot. And luckily enough, Irish whiskey started to grow, and I suppose where we came from was these single pot still whiskies, of which all of the whiskies tonight that we're going to try are single pot still whiskies. So what I'm going to do is again just read out the lineup, and basically I can see someone said, is this a work meeting? Well, for me it's work, but as Thomas well knows, you could hardly call what I do for a living, which is basically going and enjoying whiskies with new friends, and that's actually my job. So although we're doing
living the dream,
living a dream, so we're socially distanced, so this is work. So you can call it, this is education. So if anyone says to you, oh, what are you doing drinking whiskey on a Thursday night? Well, you say, this is education. You're educating yourself, so please do ask any questions that you have during the course of us tasting, and we are going to jump in right away and taste the whiskey. So the whole purpose of this is to have a bit of fun. It's not just for me to talk at you, basically. So what I'll do is, if you ask questions as we go along, it'll bring us in a certain direction. So there's no issue. So when you're tasting, it doesn't matter what type of vessel you're drinking out of. Sometimes it's better to have different glasses for each whiskey. And the reason for that is that you can kind of compare them. I like to use either an Irish Tua glass, say Tuath, and they're available from Celtic Whisky Shop's website. Thomas is using one tonight. They're Irish owned company, fantastic. And Thomas has a cool black one, but there's gold rim ones available on the website. I unfortunately only have a plain one. Or you can use please do. And another type of glass is a Glencairn, which is made by a company called Glencairn, and they're just a same idea, a wide base and a closed mouth. It's just ideal for nosing and tasting glasses. There's another type of glass called a copita, or small sherry glass, or small wine glass that you could use as well. But really, whatever glass or mug or anything that you like drinking of, that's the correct vessel to drink your whiskey from. Don't feel any pressure that it has to be a specific type of glass. It's just that I'm used to using glasses like this because they're the ones that are available from whiskey societies when they're doing tastings, or in our own distillery we use what are essentially small sherry glasses. Again, because they're a wide base, allows a lot of evaporation of flavors and aromas, and a closed mouth essentially keeps them in the glass. And secondly, you can kind of warm the whiskey slightly with your own body temperature in the glass. And also with this type of glass, you can view the whiskey very well. So what we're going to do is, when we are going to be tasting the whiskeys, we're going to look at the whiskey, we're going to smell it or nose it, and then we're going to taste it. We're not going to add water the first time we taste it. If you have water, I always have a glass of water beside me. That's a good thing to have. And that's for cleaning the palate between whiskies. But also, if you wanted to add a few drops to the whiskey, if you found it a little bit overpowering, that's a good thing to do. It helps open up the whiskey as well.
Especially for the last one.
Especially the last one, which is cask strength. So essentially has not been brought down to, it's essentially as God imagined the whiskey to be, straight from the barrel and into a bottle. So there's no dilution of any kind to reduce the alcohol content within the whiskey. So you're getting the full flavor of a whiskey as if it was coming out of the barrels that it had been matured in. So number one whiskey is called Green Spot. And the reason it's called Green Spot is that they used to color code the whiskies within Mitchell's cellars, which were on Fitzwilliam Lane, subterraneously underneath Fitzwilliam Lane, which is opposite the Department of Antishok, between Fitzwilliam Street and Merrion Street in Dublin, along the side of the Merrion Hotel. And underneath there's these cavernous, low-ceilinged, essentially cellars where Mitchell's would have stored their wines, spirits, when they imported them into Ireland. And then they would have decanted those wines and spirits into bottles, sold them to places like the Shelburne, so on and so forth, or they would have sold them to Celtic Whisky Shop if they had been in existence in the 19th century. And then they went to their local distillery, which John Jemieson's distillery in Bow Street was the main supplier of bulk spirit. Powers supplied directly to the trade in either bottle form or with barrels, whereas Jemieson were more in Ireland. They sold wholesale to essentially specialist whiskey people. They would have sold to Gilbey's, they would have sold to Findlater Grants, they would have sold to they would have sold to Mitchell's. And that's because these bonders would have had empty wine barrels, empty sherry barrels, and that they recycled essentially. They were transportation casks. They were not the type of casks that would have been used for maturing those sherries or cognacs or whatever have you. They would have been actual casks that they would have used to transport the wines and spirits from the continent to Ireland. So it was essentially, it made sense, recycle them. They weren't returnable back to Spain or France, so they couldn't be sent back to them. So what they did was up to John Jameson's distillery and filled them full of new make, a single pot still spirit made from malted barley and unmalted barley that were triple distilled in John Jameson's Bow Street distillery. And John Jameson only bottled his own whiskey for the first time in 1963, and that was Jameson Crested. So Mitchell's would have had a whiskey called Old Pat's Whiskey Liqueur, and it's the branding was as terrible as the brand name sounds. So basically, it would have had a man holding a little dog who looked like a man, a kind of a gentleman who would have been wandering around the countryside with his little dog, and he had a funny kind of Bigara hat on him. And this was the whiskey that they made in their cellars. But what they used to do is when they matured the whiskey in the cellars, they would have color-coded the casks about what age they were going to be. So on a blue spotted whiskey, which would have been a 5 to 7 year old whiskey, they would have put a blue spot on the barrels that were going to go into blue spot. They would have put on a 10-year-old whiskey a green spot, on the 12-year-old whiskey a yellow spot of paint, and they would have put a red spot of paint on the 15-year-old whiskey. And basically what that meant was that the gentlemen that worked in the cellars that were unfortunately not literate were able to know what casks to pull, and that's how they would have done it. So the green spot whiskey was a 10-year-old whiskey. This whiskey now is a non-age statement whiskey, but is essentially 7 to 10 years of age. And it is, I think for many people, it's the most accessible single pot still whiskey out there. And it's a fantastically well put together whiskey. It's mainly aged in American oak. It's about 90% of this aged in first fill bourbon, and 10% is aged in ex-Oloroso sherry butts. And what defines each member of the Spot range behind me here is the different wine cask that is used as part of the mix of casks that are used. So in the case of Green Spot, it's a Oloroso sherry cask is the fortified wine that defines it or makes it different than the other members of the Spot range of family. It's 40% ABV, and as I said, it's made from malted and unmalted barley, and it's casks that are filled with a medium style of pot still whiskey, and all of the Spot range are one type of pot still. So in Powers, you have what we call a light pot Middleton, which is actually the most spirit forward and spicy, but in there it refers to the mouthfeel as opposed to I suppose its spiciness, or it's a kind of effervescence on the palate. So this medium style of pot still is a nice, round, sweet, soft, but when aged in American oak barrels and these Oloroso sherry butts, you get, if we have a look at it, you see this kind of what I would call a kind of a lovely teardrop effect on the glass, and this indicates not the level of alcohol, it actually indicates the mouthfeel. And next of all, we look at the color. There's a lovely golden hue, like a barley field, a mature barley field. And then if we have a little nose of it, it's just a wonderful example of what pot still whiskey is. It's got this lovely pear drop type nose to it. Tropical. There's that pear, apple-y pear, even a little bit of mango, Thomas, maybe. But there's definitely that contribution of oak and a barley back, biscuity kind of grain character to it as well. To me, it's like an apple or a pear orchard with a barley field in the background with the sun rising. So very, very
Maybe we should
visible.
put that picture on the bottle.
Yeah, absolutely. But the best bit is to have a taste. Sláinte.
Sláinte.
So immediately that 2 fingers of pot still spice appear on the palate. There's a lovely creamy buttery mouthfeel in the middle of the palate. That's the unmalted barley manifesting itself in the whiskey. There's that white pepper as well. There's like a lovely mouth-watering type characteristic to it as well. And then you're definitely getting a nod to the oak at the back, that vanillic acid, loads of vanilla, loads of vanillin, and vanillic acid, which is this wood spice in the back of the palate. There's actually quite a lot of length to it. Very easy to drink. It's a lovely, accessible whiskey, and you know, in the summertime, this makes it gorgeous. You can elongate this by getting a slim jim or a long glass like this, put in 50 odd milliliters. Really easy drinking drink. So that's Green Spot. The packaging that you see here behind me, just over my shoulder, the Green Spot packaging, basically Green Spot was relaunched 12 years ago in 2010, and it was the first of a commitment by the company that I worked for to produce 2 new single pot still whiskies every year by 2020. And at the time, that seemed like a very long way away and quite an unimaginable, difficult task. By the time we got to 2018, we had 24 new pot still whiskies on the market. So it is just amazing. And we have the full pot still family back. Whiskey Live in 2012 is when they launched Yellow Spot, Whiskey Live Dublin, and then Red Spot in 2018, and Blue Spot in November 2020. So, you know, they've come along every couple of years, and that's the full family of the Spot range. So it's amazing that we're able to revive them all. So it will move on from Green Spot onto another Green Spot, but it's Green Spot, which is finished in a wine cask. So it is the second of the Wine Geese series. So the first one was the Chateau Leoville Barton, which was the first one to be released, but we're actually going to try the second one first, just based on its its character. So we're kind of building up in style and impact on the palate. So it's called Green Spot Chateau Montolina, and it's part of the Wine Geese series. So these are all Irish families, or families with Irish heritage, that essentially make wine out there. So, oh, sorry, yeah, well, we'll go on. We'll go on to that. Sorry, Thomas. That's my fault. So we'll go on to Chateau Montolina, and then we'll go back to Yellow Spot. Apologies.
No.
Sorry for confusing you all now. So we're going to try Chateau Montolina. So Green Spot Chateau Montolina is basically a whiskey that was formed out of the relationship with a family called the Barrett family, and the Barrett family are an Irish American family. So Bo Barrett and his brother run the vineyard in Napa Valley in California, and Napa Valley is basically, and Chateau Montolina are seen as the birth of the modern wine industry within America. They won a competition called the Grand Prix du Chardonnay in 1976, and the Grand Prix du Chardonnay was basically a competition in France to find the best Chardonnay in the world. And of course, every year it had been won by Chablis or another Chardonnay producer, Burgundy, or whoever it was at the time, so somewhere in France, some region in France. And what happened, it's a blind tasting and anyone can enter from the world. That's the idea. It's the best Chardonnay in the world. And these, the idea was Bo Barrett's father was to enter this competition. And Bo Barrett's father made his money as a lawyer in the insurance industry in San Francisco in the 1950s and 60s, and packed up his family and everything and bought a vineyard, an agricultural vineyard that was producing wine for agricultural brandy and stuff like that up in Napa Valley, which is like an hour and a half north of San Francisco. And basically, he was considered mad, but he had quite a mission that he wanted to modernize the vineyard. And as Porrick says there's a decent movie. It's called Bottle Shock, which is about the movie. I don't know what platform it's on, but it's nothing to do with Irish distillers, and they have like a parking space that says parking for Irish only. They're really, if you ask them, they'll tell you they're Irish. They're like totally. Their granny was from Clare, and their grandfather was from Waterford. So they're really the typical Irish story. They went off to Boston in the just after the War of Independence, and they met at a dance in Boston, and then they moved to Chicago where their father was born. So like the real deal, the real Irish American family.
The American dream.
The American dream, exactly. And in 1926, they had Bo's father in Chicago. So the idea behind the wine is to show the wine that they make there. So Zinfandel is synonymous, I suppose, with Californian wine, and a lot of the original wine producers in California in the mid-19th century were German. So you get a lot of German varietals that are grown, and French as well. So Zinfandel is grown there, and that was the idea. But they grow everything in Napa Valley. Like you can find Chardonnay, Semillon, anything you can think of, Cabernet, Merlot, all types of grapes that you can think of. So basically, the difference between this is that wine finish. There's a 12-month finish and a 24-month finish. And the French oak casks, they're 250-liter French oak casks. They're the type of wine casks they use in California. They're widely used in the wine industry all over the world. So they use these French oak wine casks in California, and then we get them seasoned by Chateau Montolina, and then they ship those wine casks to us, and then we fill them with essentially green spot whiskey, and we age in parallel 12 and 24 months, and then basically what happens is they marry that whiskey together, and voila, you get this 46% ABV whiskey. So the whiskey is between 10 and 12 years of age, or 11 and 12 years of age is kind of your age statement. But when we look at it in the glass, there's a little more of that mouthfeel, what I'm talking about is that viscosity on the glass.
The legs, yeah. I have a question there from Christine saying, what's the ratio of malted to unmalted barley when it comes to green spot?
So we use a mash bill of 60-40, and that goes generally, that would be our 60% unmalted, 40% malted. So that's our ratio. Other distilleries might use 50-50. That's a good starting point. Or other distilleries might go, up to 5% other grains. They might use 35 and 5% rye and wheat, and then also then the rest in malted barley. It really depends on what your distinct character is. We make 3 pot still styles mainly in Middleton, and we basically use that pretty much the same mash bill for all of them, and it really is down then to where we make the cuts in the second and third distillation that differentiate those different styles, plus I suppose the amount of spirit that has come from our receivers from previous days distilling, and what proportion we use within each of those cuts as well. So we have a distillery. The whole idea of building Middleton was essentially to build a distillery that could make the different styles of whiskey that made up the Irish Distillers group, which were John Jemieson's distillery in Bow Street. And that would be also the Paris distillery in John's Lane, and the Cork distilleries that went in to make up Irish distillers, which included Middleton, North Mall distillery, and Watercourse distillery as well. So to answer your question, basically it's 60% unmalted and 40% malted barley. So, but you can use up to 5% other grains, but we don't currently in our main mash bills, but we do in the micro distillery.
Yeah, which I've tasted some of them, and they're fantastic.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I mean, you know, and again with the changes in the geographic indicator, which are coming down the line, it's going to be really exciting. You know, and yeah, I mean, that's the great thing. There's such variety in Irish whiskey now. When I started again in Irish Distillers in 2001, you had your Jameson, your Powers, your Paddy, your Bushmills, a bit of Kilbeggan knocking around. You know, there really wasn't a huge variety of whiskies out there. Now there's just loads of different companies, loads of different styles, loads of different products. It's really exciting. So
absolutely. So we'll have a little nose at it, Montelena.
Yeah. So to me, it's earthier. There's more of an earthy type note to it, but it really is, as Brian says here, there's that toffee note to it. Really, you know, what it's down to, these flavors that develop are all down to acids and alcohols within both the whiskey and the wood interacting with each other, and also extracting the flavors from the wine that is used, and essentially that breaking down of the wood compounds, the compounds within the wine over, you know, not a huge period of time, but you have a really solid base there with a good single pot still whiskey, which is mainly aged in American oak, that is contributing a lot of that. I suppose a lot of that sweetness to it. That's when it goes off in a different direction. But I totally agree with Brian about that toffee note that you get.
Yeah, for sure. I find it quite citrus heavy as well in the nose, which is good. Obviously, it must be some of the cask contributing that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that little bit more alcohol as well carries a lot more flavor with it. I get where you're thinking. I'm thinking of like that kind of chocolate orangey type note to it as well. Candied orange, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, kind of sweet and citrus at the same time. Kind of,
yeah. So it's a really, you know, there is exactly the same style of whiskey aged in the same profile of cask, bar the finish. And what is amazing is the contribution of the 46% is the ABV, Aoife, and basically the main difference here is that that finish in those wine casks bring it off in a totally different direction. They're also a different type of oak as well. So they're made from Quercus robur. So that's what they're made from. Whereas there's mainly American oak in the base whiskey, which is Quercus alba, or white American oak from the eastern continental United States. So that's made, you know, toasted oak, vanillin, wood spice, white pepper. Whereas now you're getting with this European oak, you're getting much more of a tannic influence combined with the wine, and all of that's then broken down by acids and alcohols, and it transforms into these amazing flavors. You know, really interesting.
Absolutely.
It's a lovely whiskey.
See what it's like in the palate.
Launch it. It definitely has more of a softer impact on the palate. There's more of a mouthfeel even in this. It's, you know, definitely you get a bit of that, what I would call grape tannin, or possibly it's the tannin from the French oak up the front of the palate. But there's that lovely creaminess again in the palate. The finish is almost a little bit, it's like bittersweet.
It's longer for sure over the.
Oh, definitely much longer. Yeah. And look, again, the European oak is going to have more of an open structure, so it's going to get more of that influence in a quicker amount of time. And we get those, the barrels are coming from a cooperage called Sagan Moreau, and they're based they have a cooperage in California, but they also have cooperages in cognac, in sherry, all this different reasons. So Kieran, that's the Chateau Montolina that we're drinking, Green Spot Chateau Montolina. Because I jumped ahead of myself, that's why, Kieran. So I apologize for that.
Not to worry.
So is there any more questions on Chateau Montolina? As Colin said, it's the 11th one we're trying. Price-wise,
yeah, the Green Spot original is €60. The two wine finish, so the Montelena and the next one up, I believe, the Leoville Barton, they are €70. Yellow Spot being 80. Those are the ones that are available at the moment.
And it's 40. All of these, Green Spot is 40%. All the whiskies, all the other whiskies we're trying tonight, the Chateau Montolina, the Chateau Leoville Barton, the Yellow Spot, and the Red Spot are all 46% ABV. But the Blue Spot is at cask strength, so it's it's much higher in ABV. What's the I have the ABV here.
58.7, I believe.
8.7. Yeah, 58.7, absolutely. So, and again, it's essentially the wine used either fortified or the wine used either fortified or wine that differentiate each one of these. That's the main difference. Age as well is another differentiation as well. As you can see, it's a Green Spot, but it's older because of that wine finish. So look, we'll move on to our next. These are ongoing expressions, so they're available. The Green Spot is available all the time. But what we're finding is, as the growth of them, as they're growing, what's happening is things are going out of stock quicker because we can only produce so much on a regular basis. But we'll talk about more about this. What's the difference between a spot still and a redbreast pot still? Single pots. The difference is, well, the main difference would be the type of base spirit that's mainly used in it. So redbreast is actually two different types of pot still spirit are used, and that is light pot Middleton and some medium pot still are used in redbreast, but the sherry casks and the sherry casks, which account for the major contribution of the flavor, are light pot Middleton, but there is also some American oak aged medium pot still in there, as well as some light pot aged in ex-American oak barrels. And also the age, I suppose redbreast starts at 12 years of age. It's 12 to 15 years of age, a 12-year-old, whereas Green Spot is mainly American oak, 90% first fill bourbon, and then about 10% sherry, and it's all medium pot still. The whole lot of it, all aged in parallel. It's not like and that would be the difference. And I suppose they are really different. They're really down to the traditions of how the whiskey was made historically, and that's why they're different. Even though they're the same distillery, if you put them side by side, I think you would not have to be in any way a whiskey expert to pick out one of the Green Spot from the redbreast. I think they would both be very distinct from an aroma point of view, a flavor point of view, etc.
Absolutely, they're night and day. And then if you put Howard John's Lane aside, you'd have a third completely different expression.
So the next whiskey we're going to try is, we're going to go back to Yellow Spot, and I apologize, Thomas. We agreed beforehand the lineup, and then I messed it up and went off on a tangent. So we're going to go to Yellow Spot now.
Not to worry.
So Yellow Spot is 46% ABV, as I mentioned, and it's again a single pot still whiskey. Now, what the difference between this is and Green Spot is, the casks used, there's ex-American whiskey barrels. There's also sherry barrels as well. But now there's also the inclusion of Spanish oak barrels that have been seasoned with Malaga wine. And Malaga wine is grown on the Sierra Nevada mountains behind Malaga City, south-facing vineyards, and they are incredibly sweet. It's an incredibly sweet wine. It's beautiful on ice cream if you're ever in Andalusia to put some of this Malaga wine on your ice cream. But it leads to a really, really sweet flavor, a sweet wine, and it imparts that sweetness onto your yellow spot whiskey. And like, to me, when I if you look at it in the glass, you'll see it just sticks to the side of the glass. There's no tears, there's no legs. It just literally sticks to the side of the glass. So it has this wonderful mouthfeel. Color wise as well, it's a little bit richer in color than Green Spot. More of a, I don't know, copper hue. It's just that little bit richer. Again, you've much more European oak in this, so you're going to get more of a contribution from tannin. This is not a finish. These are 3 different barrels of whiskey. So you have your ex-American whiskey barrel, your sherry barrel, and your Malaga wine cask, all aged in parallel for, 12 to about 15 years of age. So minimum age of the whiskey in here is 12 years of age, 46% ABV. Both the sherry barrels and the Malaga wine casks are made from Spanish oak. And that's essentially the makeup of it.
And is it done in different percentages? Sorry, Ger. Like,
yes, it is.
X percentage of bourbon, sherry, and Malaga.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. So the contribution of the Malaga wine cask is larger than the sherry, but the largest proportion of casks are again the ex-American whiskey barrels. But to say that the sherry barrels and the Malaga wine cask contribute flavor-wise more to it. So the American oak aged medium pot still is like a really good base.
Yeah.
And then the other flavor is built on top of it. So even though proportion-wise it's probably 70-30 from the point of view of 70% ex-American whiskey barrels and 30% European oak over proportion, which is Malaga and sherry. The Malaga is greater. So let's, for argument's sake, say it's 10% sherry, 20% Malaga, and 70% American. It's actually 50% of the flavor is probably coming from those European oak barrels, both the sherry and the Malaga. And I think you'll see that when you nose it.
Yeah, straight away it's honeyed peaches.
It's wonderful. Yeah, absolutely. A wonderfully rich nose to it. It's spicier as well. You've
like
got
peppery.
much more of a spicy type nose to it. I think it's like it often reminds me of like creme brulee, that type of nose to it. It's got that like kind of caramelized sugar type note, like panna catalana or panna cotta, that type of note to it. And if we were to have a little sip, Sláinte.
Sláinte.
Little bit of spiciness, and then just creaminess, sweetness, and then this effervescent spicy white pepper spice on the side of the palate, leading to this lovely mouth watering to it. It's really morsome as well. Leaves a nice dryness in the front of the palate, and you just want to have another sip. So enjoy it again, Sláinte.
Absolutely. I won't say no to the second sip of Yellow Spot. It's actually been a while since I've had it, but now you mentioned the panna cotta, the creme brulee, it really has come to the fore. And again, I don't know whether that's, you kind of put it into my mind, but
that's it. My suggestive tasting notes. But it always reminds me. I can't. I think it is. I can't get away from that lovely. Someone says dessert whiskey. with that dessert sweetness to it. It's really just a delicious whiskey from that point of view, and often overlooked because there's so many good whiskies out there. People are always chasing the next unicorn. Really, this is an incredibly well put together whiskey, and for the price point, a 12 to 15-year-old whiskey with this quality of casks, the amount of effort that's put into having only the best quality casks, the best quality grain by Kevin O'Gorman, Finbar Curran, Karen Cotter, and our blessed Deirdre and Dave. You can just see all the way through the production of this that if all the inputs are of the highest quality, this is what this sort of thing that comes out. Yeah, and it's
for sure.
Yeah. So
Desi just asked there, how is Irish whiskey's popularity compared to Scotch whiskey? I suppose Irish whiskey's still rising.
It's basically
Scotch had the upper hand for a while.
It's very simple. They're there for the moment. Our world domination is our ultimate goal. We are currently well on the objective. But look, Irish whiskey is going to hit 13 million cases this year. I've no doubt, if not more. And again, 20 years ago, when I first started working in the company, God, if we hit 2 million cases, we were delighted, and that was for the whole industry.
Sorry for interrupting there, Ger. The Jameson original, I believe, maybe not December just gone, but December beforehand, reached globally, I think, in the hundreds of thousand cases, like 900,000 cases or something like that globally in 1 month.
Yeah, a million.
Crazy.
We shipped 1 million cases in one month. Yeah. I would be very confident Jameson will hit 10 million cases sometime in the very near future. It's just incredible. But, and that's the thing, Jameson opens the door globally. We all have this great selection of Irish whiskey here, and that's what makes Scotland so interesting is the variety. As you were saying, what's the difference? Well, to give you in figures terms, we were about 10 times smaller than Scotch. So they sell more single malt, or were selling more single malt whiskey than our whole industry combined. But now we account for, we're growing at a much faster rate than they are. They have all sorts of problems around.
Technical file.
Yeah, exactly. And we are now the largest exporter from the European Union of whiskey, whereas they're in the United Kingdom, and their largest market is France, which doesn't make any sense. So I think it's, it's going really, really well. And I could see when I visited Scotland a couple of years ago that they were almost very dismissive of Irish whiskey, which I found a little bit offensive, to be honest. But I think that's when you've got your back up a little bit, and you are kind of wondering how are they managing to grow so quickly in so many markets. So exports are up 19%. That's true. Yeah, last fiscal. So it's all going well, and it's going well because there's variety, and there's a really great quality product that is protected by EU and Irish legislation, and basically no non-age statement yellow spot. No, oh yeah,
that was mine.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it's just someone asking about yellow spot there.
Yeah, so it's going well. But the great thing is it's growing in Ireland. That's the important thing, and I'm assuming most people are based in Ireland, but maybe they aren't. So so why don't we move on to our next whiskey, which is really exciting, which is Chateau Montolina, or Chateau Leoville Barton. Oh my God, I did it again, Thomas. Sorry. The whiskey.
There's two of us here.
It's the whiskey. Let me grab it there.
Now, I will admit, having tried these all before, lucky me, this is actually, before I try it again, my favorite spot. And it was all because of yourself, Ger. So we did a tasting time with a whiskey society. It was for the launch of Red Spot. We had a Christmas party with the whiskey society I'm in, and we tried them all. And there was a certain tasting note that I won't say until we go through it here, that I couldn't put my finger on it. I love the whiskey and I couldn't put my finger on it. And you said it without knowing I was trying to guess. And it just clicked. And that's what That's why I fell in love with Leoville Barton. So I'm going to see if anyone can get the tasting note that I did that night, and maybe they'll fall in love with it as much as I have. So
I'm under pressure now. I'm trying to think.
Yeah.
What the tasting note is.
I can tell you afterwards, don't worry.
What the cool. Okay. Well, for me, first off, what's interesting about this, it is from the famous, wonderful vineyard, which is Chateau Leoville Barton. So the Barton family originally are from Fermanagh. They made their money by smuggling cattle, as you do. So what they used to do is they used to bring their cattle to one of the royal ports, which is in Donegal, called Ballyshannon. It was one of the royal ports in Ireland. There were certain ports appointed by the Crown that you could only export from the country, goods and food and whatever else, through these ports, so the Crown could control trade. But what the Barton family decided to do was bypass all of this tax and trade stuff. They had their own fleet of ships, and they used to basically put the cattle on ships to France and to Spain and sell them, avoiding paying any duty to the Crown, essentially. So they made their money. Eventually what they did was they used this money very cleverly to buy a vineyard in Bordeaux, in Saint-Julien. And then they made loads of money selling the wine, became very popular, and their main market was the royals and the aristocracy of London. That was their main market. So ironically, they were robbing them and making them buy their wine at the same time. And then they went and bought what became the K Club. That was their Irish seat, or their renewed Irish seat. So the family had a little bit of a pepper history, and they are 7th generation Irish. They've been living in France for 7 generations, but they're Irish passport holders. They cheer for Ireland when France are playing Ireland in the rugby, but they're French. They're French people ultimately at the end of the day. So Leoville Barton is a famous name, and they're the same family as the Barton and Gestier brand, which is a big brand off the Strand in London. They have a wine shop or that sort of thing. So basically, the idea behind this is a Saint-Julien, great example of a Bordeaux claret wine. So it's a Cabernet Merlot type of wine, and it is French wine barrels, again, 250 litre or 225 litre wine barocks, they're called. So just a style of barrel, 225 litre French oak wine barrels, and again made by the Segon Moreau cooperage in Cognac, and then shipped down to Chateau Leoville Barton and Saint-Julien, seasoned with their beautiful claret wine. Unfortunately, they empty out the claret wine and then ship the barrels to us. The barrels are they're filled within 3 days of being disgorged in the vineyard in France, and then they're filled with the medium pot still spirit that is aged in American oak. And then basically what happens is it's again aged for 12 and 24 months, and then they marry the wine together. So it just really is just such a beautiful nose. It's really, really attractive. It's unmistakably a green spot wine, but there is this ruby hue to it. I don't know if you can see it. I have a good light here beside me. It's almost like a ruby halo to it. It's definitely that red wine giving the claret wine, giving the lovely example to it. On the glass, like loads of legs, but it's when I nose it.
Yeah, some great notes coming in with fresher sweets, maple syrup.
Yeah, I get that. To me, it's like got this kind of fruit crush type note to it. It's got this like raspberry, strawberry, kind of fruit crush. It's really, really sweet, and I can definitely see the maple syrup type vanilla type note to it as well, and that richness that you get, that rich sweetness. It's just a beautiful whiskey on the nose, and I think we should have a taste. Launch it.
Let's launch it. As good as I remember.
Sorry?
It's as good as I remember, and you've already mentioned the note, by the way. You mentioned the nose, so very good, very well remembered. It was strawberry.
Oh, very good. That's great. Phew. I was worried, but the only other thing to say is that different times of the year, you're eating different foods, you're drinking different drinks, the atmosphere, ambient, the ambient, whatever you call it, your surroundings are different. You're inside more in the winter. It can be a little bit drier on your palate. But the thing is, I think I always get that strawberry blush type note. It's like, it's not like full on strawberry. It's like that strawberry crush. It's really, really subtle. Those soft red fruits. It's really, really nice. But it's got a lovely balance to it. It's really well balanced. Again, you get a little bit of that grape tannin, if you want to call it, a wine tannin at the front of the palate, but not as pronounced. But you're getting that wood tannin then as well, really complementing it. It's just so balanced and structured, lovely length to it. It's hitting different parts of the palate all the time, and it's really super silky, yummy, delicious whiskey. Yeah,
as Ross says, they're a lot smoother, not as spicy. And then muscovado sugar taste. Absolutely. That's the kind of sweetness you're getting. Yeah.
But it's amazing how different they are. They're all like pretty much the same age, same base spirit, same pot still whiskey, but again defined by the wine cask that is used in the maturation. That really is what makes a difference. And I'd agree with Brian there about not adding water. I tend to find that the structure of whiskey, if you add water, it's actually maybe a bit of fun to try it or see its structure when you add water to it. So it's amazing. Different whiskeys for different things. So any more wine geese range on the horizon? I think there could be sometime in the future. The good problem is that we've brought out red spot and blue spot in recent years. So there just really hasn't been room, but they're constantly experimenting in Midleton with different, wine finishes, different drink finishes, whatever they are, and some of them see the light of day and some will never see the light of day, if that makes sense. So what's the reasoning between releasing blue spot at two slightly different ABVs? Do you know what? We'll come on to that when we get to it, but that's very easily explained and there's no problem there. So Shane, if I don't answer it when we get on to blue spot, please bring it up again. But it just for ease of people understanding, we'll move on to the next one so that we can move on to that one when we get to the blue spot. So Shane, if I don't answer it, you make sure, ask it again, and I'll definitely answer it at the time. So we were told to use its tastes. There's a wrong way to taste whiskey, and every whiskey is different. So the first time that you try any whiskey, I'd recommend trying it or trying to try it without adulteration. So as the blender wanted you to try it, and the reason behind that is that you can add water to whiskey, but you can't take it away. You can add ice to whiskey, but you can't take it away. So start off, if you find you nose the whiskey and you go, oh my God, that's really overwhelming. Or you taste it and you're going, oh my God, that's really overwhelming my palate. But just add a few drops of water, it'll soften it and open it up. Have another taste of it. Oh, find it a little more overwhelming, add a few more drops of water. Last resort, add ice, because ice will dumb down a lot of the flavors. So for example, the whiskies that I'm tasting, I had most of these in the car. I had to go to my car this morning, knowing I was doing the tasting tonight, and take them out so that they would come up to the ambient temperature of the room, so that the flavors that are in these whiskies would not be dumbed down. Look, have you ever tried a American lager with a big brand name? Have you ever tried it at room temperature? It's not very nice. It's not when it's chilled in an inch of life. Tried a Chilean Sauvignon Blanc. Tried it at room temperature. Not very nice. Freezing cold. It's actually quite nice. So whiskey's kind of these flavors, and you won't be able to appreciate them. So there is no right or wrong way of doing it. That's what I was saying about your glass. There's no right glass or wrong glass. So, you know, if you don't have one of these, if you don't have a Tua glass or a Glencairn or a, you know, there's no right or wrong way. So don't feel under pressure. And certainly, I was in Napa Valley and I went to a vineyard, and the guy was telling me, you know, a lot of BS in my opinion. You know, again, I've been lucky enough and been sent off to Champagne and done loads of training on Champagnes. I know it's a hard life. It's really, really tough. But basically, your man was telling me, oh, this, you have to pour it this way and you have to drink. Oh, it's just like, no, you don't. That's absolute shite. You know, you don't have to drink it out of that type of glass and do that. But he told me he was at the Academy of Champagne. I asked my colleagues in France, and they said never heard of it. So anyway, that's, you know, if people are telling you, they're just telling you how you should drink. This is a good way for you to approach it. But don't feel, my recommendation would be the first time you try new whiskey, try it neat. If you go into Celtic whiskey shop and Thomas is there, one of the other guys, they usually have a number of bottles that they have available. They'll guide you through tasting the whiskey, which is really, really helpful. So they usually have a decent selection of bottles that are open. So if you go into Celtic whiskey and you're looking for something new to try, Thomas and the rest of the team will guide you through it. But they
after
won't
COVID,
tell you,
unfortunately, Ger.
Oh well. Sorry.
Yeah.
After COVID.
Sadly.
Yeah, sadly. In normal times, you're able to go in, you know, try different whiskeys, and sometimes I'll be on the barrel there trying stuff. But you know, adding water and ice is up to yourself. So that's up to you. So. And I love the lads in Tullamore, and I'm a good friend of Kevin, their global ambassador and stuff like that. So I'm not saying dissing them in any way, and it's just that's the way they structure their guided tour. But you know, I think even Kevin, their ambassador, agree with me that, you know, every whiskey is different. So we're going to get on to our next whiskey, which is a whiskey that was released in 2018, before all of this madness. And am I going the right way first, Thomas?
We are. Red Spot.
Red Spot, perfect.
On, yes.
Okay, so Red Spot, here it is. Oh. And what you notice about Red Spot is has a big 1.5 on the label here. So that indicates the youngest whiskey in here is 15 years of age. And the difference with this whiskey is, yes, it has whiskey aged in bourbon and sherry in its full life, but also it has a contribution of Marsala wine casks, which are wonderful, just really a great flavor bomb in the whiskey. The Marsala is produced in Sicily, which is, when you look at the boot of Italy, it's the part of Italy that's being kicked by the boot. And it's this amazing island, volcanic island, that has had huge influences from the Moors, from the Normans, from the Romans, from the, you know, just every major influence in the Mediterranean. The Turks, you know, everyone has invaded Sicily, and has influenced with each wave more and more layers of what they do there. Now, interestingly enough, Marsala is really, there's only two commercial wine producers. Commercial, not, you know, a lot of the other ones that are there really only make it for kind of local supply for Sicily. But there's only really two commercial wine producers, of which one is called Villa Florio, and that's where we source these Marsala wine casks from. So Kevin O'Gorman, Finbar Kern, Jonathan Mitchell and Robert Mitchell went over to Sicily to essentially, again, tough job, to it's basically visit Villa Florio and select the casks. And these casks were like they were laid down 16, 17 years ago, and that's the problem. Irish whiskey 16, 17 years ago. The good problem is that we have stock of it. The bad problem is that the whiskey, a demand for Irish whiskey and stuff like red spot has exploded. So people are saying to us, you're like red spot, you're selling out straight away and it's gone straight away. Like, would you not just make more? Well, we can't, because the casks we laid down for the first batch were laid down 16 years previously. And that's a bit of a challenge from the point of view of red spots like 15 to 21 years of age. So those casks are kind of 16 to 21 years of age. So it's a bit difficult to magic up casks. Unfortunately, not going to amount of red spot produced at any one time. Marsala Casks also aged for the full 15 years. Marsala Casks are actually older, so they're kind of 19 to 21 in the main. And basically, Blue Spot is the same problem. We lay down casks, but whiskey wasn't where it is now today, with the imagination that people would be we laid down more than we thought we would need. So the Marsala Casks, the whiskey itself is 15 to 21 years of age, and the Marsala wine casks are a much bigger proportion than the sherry casks again. So number-wise, they're more. They're also 550-litre barrels from what I remember, which is really is 50 litres bigger than a sherry, but it's similar. They're also American oak, whereas the sherry butt is a Quercus robur. It's a Galician Spanish oak, and this would be the tradition of the Marsala wine producers. They mature their their fortified Marsala wine in American oak, as do the sherry producers. They're both actually matured in American wood, and the reason being is that the closed structure of the American wood actually is more stable for longer maturation. It doesn't, I suppose, dominate the wine from a flavor point of view. So the casks that we use in sherry are actually transportation casks, so that we're trying to recreate from the 19th and early 20th century. That's why we use the local Spanish oak, and it's the same in the Marsala, but we just don't have any examples of that. So Marsala wine itself is uniquely produced in that they produce a fortified wine, which is fortified with a brandy, and they also double cook. Essentially, they cook a proportion of the wine, doppio, they call it, and they make cheese like this as well, which is really interesting. It's kind of a traditional way of preserving the wine, and then they marry the two back together, and then they put them back into a cask. So it adds the cooking of the wine and the fortification, marrying them and putting them back into a cask. One, it kills basically any microbial activity that's happening within the wine, including yeast, because it is a environment that is not, that really nothing can grow in, and it also then is basically married together for a certain period in there. So you're getting this almost concentration of wine flavors and the fortification leading to this, what I can only describe as a jam or a preserve type characteristic to the final product. So red spot, so it's 46% ABV. Do you get that jamminess to it? I hope you do. A bit of apricot, I think.
Got a toasted oak.
Toasted oak, absolutely. And that's an American oak,
And is it matured exactly the same way as yellow spot, all individual?
Yeah, all individual casks age for a minimum of 15 years. So your ex-American barrels, your sherry barrels, and your Marsala wine casks all age for a minimum of 15 years. And the age range is 15 to 21 years. That's the age range. So the minimum age of the Marsala cask is 16 years of age, and that's why we can't produce more than we have produced in each batch, because essentially what happens is we can't we can't go back 16 years and kind of lay down more. So that's the wonderful thing, is that whiskey has grown so much that we're able to we're able to have this now today. But so that's it. And yeah, it's just beautiful on the nose. It's that apricot, toasted oak, vanilla.
It's quite nutty as well.
Yeah, and that you get that more whiskey is aged in wood, you get this compound called furfural developing, and it adds to this nuttiness essentially to the whiskey, and also can be a bit of a kind of hint of cocoa or coffee in there as well. So let's have a sip. Let's launch it. That is yummy. Isn't it much spicier forward on the palate, but again has that creaminess and sweetness to it. It's you definitely get the influence of the Marsala straight away. That toasted oak you're talking about, Thomas, is really apparent as a bitterness, a nice contrast to the sweetness. This contrast, very balanced, very long finish, a lot of wood contribution, but in a very structured way. So it's not like just hitting the back of the palate. You really feel it going down the palate. Again, a lovely dryness in front of the palate. It's like really dry in the front of my palate.
Yeah.
Which leads to it's more some. It just wants to make you have another sip.
Absolutely. So Kieran says, how much does this red spot retail for? 130, but unfortunately it is out of stock for the reasons that Ger has mentioned.
We just don't have stock of the Marsala, and that's simply down to the growth of Irish whiskey. That, like, when they were laying down these expensive enough casks, they'd no imagination that things would have grown so well over the last number of years, But at least they had the foresight to lay it down. And, Brendan Monks, who was our head of maturation prior to, and worked on blending as well with Dr. Barry Walsh back in the 80s and 90s. They basically had the foresight in the 70s to go out when it was pretty obvious that we weren't going to have any more transportation casks coming back into the country. In fact, that stopped in the 50s and 60s. By the mid 60s, there was no more drinks essentially coming in barrels into the country that we could use for recycle to use for whiskey maturation. So in the 50s, the Pure Pot Still Appreciation, the Pure Pot Still Whiskey Producers Society went over to, our association even went over to America and signed a contract with the American whiskey producers to buy their empty barrels, because, as you know, bourbon and Tennessee whiskey, you can only use the barrel once, and then you have to get rid of the barrel. So there was a good market to buy barrels from. And then people like Brendan Monks went to Marsala, Malaga, the Sherry country, and every other traditional place we would have that barrels that were just come into Ireland, and had the foresight to buy barrels from these people. Now we literally buy the wood from the forest. We get local sawmills to prepare the wood for coopering, and then we work with cooperages like the Paez Maria cooperage in Jerez de Frontero, Segon Moreau in Cognac, or the Davar cooperage in Hungary. We use all of these different cooperages to help us to source our barrels unlimited in Kentucky, or so we have these long-standing relationships which sound quite recent, when you say 70s, 80s, 90s. But when I think about 1972 was 50 years ago, which is quite shocking, really. Yeah. It is half a century ago that they started these relationships to essentially build up the stock. And we really are because we've been around for 246 years in some shape or form or another, where we have the oldest stock and the largest inventory on the island. And that's down to, again, when no one was drinking Irish whiskey, people had the foresight that it would rise again, and let's lay all this stuff down for when it does happen. So any questions on Red Spot before we move on to our ultimate whiskey?
There's actually a couple there, Ger.
Yeah, go on ahead.
Kelly says, what's the reason for the age range between each barrel type? Some barrels mature at different rates or matching ratios in the final blend. So, like, for example, you said the Red Spot Marsala were 16 years.
Yeah.
Is there a particular reason for that?
So the reason for it is that we, as a guide, we went on, or when I say we went, Kevin O'Gorman, Billy Lighton, Deirdre and Dave, our blenders, Karen Cotter, our distiller, they would have looked at, what they would have looked at is essentially the original core range of the 1920s Spot range and tried to find out what differentiated them from each other. So they would have been able to get, with Yellow Spot, they were able to get a sample from the little museum in Dublin. Someone allowed us to extract a sample from a 1920s Yellow Spot, which was amazing. So they were able to identify the flavor profiles within that sample. And then going by the records from Mitchell's, they were able to look at the ages of the inventory in Mitchell's ledgers, and also there is no examples of Red Spot that I know of anyway. I don't know, do you, Thomas, of pre-war Red Spot or any?
Nothing that I know of, no.
Not that I know of anyway, but basically, but going by the inventory, they're able to recreate essentially the new product. So that's what guided the ages on it. But as a whiskey evolves or it continues its maturation, it is this constant subtractive, this evaporation, reactive, the interaction I was talking about with the different wood compounds, and that interactive, this constant ebb and flow, this diaphragm of a barrel, expanding in the summer, contracting in the winter, sucking in, the whiskey in the summertime, and then basically pushing the whiskey back into the wood again, taking out wood compounds and the contribution of what was in the wood beforehand, and all of that happening in this complex chemical evolution is happening over, in this case, nearly 2 decades in the whiskey that we're drinking here. You get the development of flavors, I suppose softening of the whiskey, or that structure I was talking about how balanced and structured it is coming from both the skill of our blending team, but also because of essentially the whiskey as it's aged for a longer period is able to mellow out. So I just want to look at that question again, the age range of each barrel. Yeah, so basically what would happen is with each of these, they would have experience over, handed on from each blender, each distiller, to know that when they put a certain type of spare type into, or a certain type of pot still whiskey into a type of barrel, particularly with American oak, they have a very good idea of how it's going to turn out at 5 years, 7 years, at 10 years, at 15 years. It's down to experiences handed on from each master distiller, master blender, master maturation throughout the generations. So that's essentially, they're educated guesses, very, very educated guesses and skilled, I suppose, decision makers. Like when you think about it, when I'm looking at it, Brendan Monks, Kevin O'Gorman. So in the last 50 years, we've had 2 masters of maturation. That's pretty.
It's a lot of knowledge.
It's a lot of knowledge, and then Brendan Monks would have would have worked in. Brendan Monks would have worked in John's Lane. Clement Ryan, who was John C. Ryan, the last of the Powers family, would have been our first. Like he would have been head of production and would have passed on his knowledge then to Barry Crockett, and like he was born in the 1890s, so like what I'm trying to point out is that even though it's passing on, it's a lot of knowledge over centuries passed on to people. So I've gone off on a tangent there and told you all sorts of stuff that none of you ever wanted to know, but now you know it. You're never going to forget it, I hope. So why don't we move on to I love Red Spot. It is just an absolutely fantastic whiskey. And why don't we move on to our final whiskey of the night, which I think you'll agree is a beautiful, a really exciting whiskey to try. So let's tell you a little bit about Blue Spot. So it's that cask strength, okay? So you've got to be a little bit wary of it a little bit. It's very drinkable, in my opinion, at 58.7%. So when we filled those barrels up, they're filled at 63.4% ABV. So 63.4%, that's very exact. Why, you ask, 63.4% alcohol by volume? Well, they come off the still at 84.5% ABV. So the new make pot still spirit comes off the still at 84.5%. And then it is reduced down with reverse osmosis water. So essentially water that's been demineralized, and any other phosphates or anything else, sodium, is taken out of it. And basically it is watered down or brought down to 63.4% with this reverse osmosis water, because it is seen as the optimum level of ABV to minimize evaporation and maximize interaction with those wooden oak barrels. And these are all oak barrels, ex-American whiskey barrels, or bourbon barrels as they're commonly known, sherry barrels, so barrels made from Galician oak, 500 litre sherry barrels that have been seasoned with Oloroso sherry for 2 to 3 years and then sent to our distillery in Middleton, and Madeira wine casks from Portugal. So Madeira is a part of Portugal. It's an island part of Portugal. It's off about, I think it's about 1,000 kilometers off the coast of Portugal in the Atlantic Ocean. And Funchal is its capital, and it's made up of archipelago of islands, and Madeira being the big one. It's essentially a volcano in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and they grow they make a fortified wine there called Madeira wine. It's made kind of a similar way to port. Port comes from Porto, and Porto gives Portugal its name. So Porto is in the north of Portugal, and it's actually the oak is sourced from essentially up the Douro Valley. Just north of it, there is a big ancient oak forest that the Romans used to build ships. There's actually a Roman road right into the middle of the forest, and one half of the forest is in Galicia, and the other half is in Portugal. So we get our Galician oak from the Spanish side, which is in the north, and the south side of the forest is the Portuguese side, and that's where we get our Portuguese oak from. So it's essentially the same oak, but it is made in a Portuguese cooperage just outside Porto, and it is the barrels then, the newly made barrels are sent to Madeira by ship, obviously, and then they're seasoned with Madeira wine. And Madeira wine is a fortified wine which is made on the island of Madeira, and we use the what is it called? The Madeira house, or the fortified wine house, which is called Enrique. So that's the name of the Madeira house. I doubt many of you have tried Madeira. It's not a hugely common drink anymore, but was once very popular in Ireland and in Britain. That's why Mitchell's would have had Madeira wine casks as part of their inventory of casks that were basically maturing pot still whiskey in their cellars in Fitzwilliam Lane, and that's why we worked with them. So there's a guy that we work with called Humberto Jardine, and he's a barrel, I don't know what you call him. He used to work for Sandyman, which is a famous port wine producer, and he has been working with us now for nearly 4 decades in sourcing both Portuguese port barrels, which you think is something like Rebus 27-year-old, and he's also been working with us to source these barrels in Madeira. It helps that obviously he comes from he's Portuguese, and he comes from I suppose the the industry. So he's able to work with us to source these barrels, and they're pretty cool. Like they use obviously grapes that are grown on the island of Madeira. Some of them which are common, Malvasia being one of them, which are quite common in Madeira. So it's a very unique product, kind of like port, but not really, if that makes sense. It's slightly different. It's more think tropical island, volcanic soil. They get quite a bit of rain as well. So it's not as dry and doesn't get as cold as it would do in the Douro Valley in the winter. So that's my little spiel about it. But it's a single pot still whiskey, aged for it's 7 to 20 years, which is just absolutely incredible. So 7 to 20 years, and cask strength. So 58.7%. It's a lot of alcohol. So I will not be offended. It's full of flavor because you've all those concentrated flavors in there. What happens is when you empty out a barrel, we cannot control the alcohol level. This is getting back to the question that was asked about the why each batch of a cask strength whiskey does the alcohol vary. We fill the barrel at 63.4%, but through evaporation, essentially what happens is we lose, roughly 2% by volume every year, but not 2% by alcohol. The alcohol evaporation will vary, but basically, each barrel then we can't control the exact amount of alcohol that evaporates out of that barrel. So you're going to get, say, an ex-American whiskey barrel, say, is 59%, and then you get the Madeira wine barrels are lower again. They could be below. They could be like 55% because they're aged for much longer, and then you get the sherry barrels could be 59.9%.
Sorry, Ger, were you just there for a second?
Did I totally drop off there? What was the last thing you heard me say?
Different percentages of different barrels. I remember that.
Yeah, so basically what I'm trying to get at is basically you can have a barrel that comes out at a lower ABV than what's on the label, because there is a whiskey that is a higher ABV than is on the label. And then when you vat all those whiskeys in a vat, as we call it, and then we bottle it, it'll come out at the 58.7%. But that'll change with each batch of cask strength whiskey that we make, because we don't know what the next batch of barrels, what the ABV is going to be. And I suppose that's the uniqueness of cask strength whiskies, is that they come out at whatever God intends them to come out at. And it's the nearest thing that you get to trying the lucky thing that people that have been to Middleton get to try, and that's you get to go taste whiskey straight from a barrel, and that's essentially the cool thing. So I said there's a blue Spot bottle for everyone in the audience, but that must have been
an empty one, maybe.
My alter ego.
The second batch of blue Spot was 58.9, by the way. Very close. Trevor saying there, when you say cask strength, what do you mean? So literally the strength that was in the barrel into the bottle, essentially. Just a second.
Sorry.
There we go. You're back again.
Means that so when you fill the casks at 63.4%, that you never add any more water. That's why a 40% whiskey is 40%, because they reduce it from cask strength down to 40%, or 46% whiskey is 46%, because you're reducing down the strength from what it came out of a cask at. So that's what cask strength means. It simply means it is literally brought from the barrel and put into, there's no chill filtering, there's no color adulteration. It is literally put into your bottle for you to enjoy in its natural and beautiful form. But definitely add a little bit of water, I think, to this one. And after, again, isn't it incredible that you can try that at 58.7% and not feel any massive impact on your palate. So what I get on the nose for me is more of those tropical fruits you were talking about in I think back in earlier on when we were looking at like kind of the group spot Chateau Leoville Barton or Chateau Montolina. You're definitely getting that zestiness you were talking about as well, Thomas, earlier. Loads of black pepper, loads of vanilla as well, and you'd expect that because you've got that American whiskey base to it, but there is again a larger proportion of those Madeira than sherry. So Madeira is really dominating. So the Madeira cask is really significant in this. It's a big proportion of the whiskey, and look, the sherry is there essentially to add a more of a dried fruit type flavor to it. So have a little sip. Launch it.
Launch it.
Oh, it's really smooth, isn't it? Like super smooth. There's very fruity though as well.
Like I get quite a bit of like clove, almost like baking spice to it. Obviously with the heat on the Madeira, but still, as you said, quite fruity.
Yeah, it's funny saying that. I'm now just getting loads of cloves. You're absolutely right. Yeah, but loads of vanilla and other spices as well. That nuttiness is there as well. Again, because it's aged for so long, that compound furfural I talked about is very much coming apparent. Got great length to it. Like it's really drinkable. Kind of like those, kiwi, pineapple-y type spiciness. Like it's really, really, really nice. Very long-lasting finish. Very drinkable at cask strength.
Yeah, that's the kind of danger, isn't it? Even at that strength, it's so easy to drink. It's
bursting with flavor, isn't it? It's really, but definitely add a bit of water to it. And as someone said earlier,
now, I've tried with and without water previously, and I actually prefer it without water. As you said, that may change when different temperatures, as you were saying before, and different palate depending on what you've eaten and drink that day. It can definitely change for sure. Bobby agrees with me. No water. Good man.
So when you say Blue Spot is 7 to 20-year whiskey, how do you, which bottle has been 20 or 7 year? So the whiskey, so I think what you're saying, how do you know? So 7 is the youngest whiskey in here, and then 20 is the oldest, but the makeup of each batch will be very similar because there's I don't want to call it a formula, but there's a certain number of roughly of what proportion of ex-American whiskey barrels of Middleton medium pot still or ex-Oloroso sherry barrels with Middleton medium pot still, and then the Madeira wine casks as well. There is a rough proportion, and that's why flavor-wise each batch will vary slightly as well because they're unique. What happens is when you're making an ongoing expression, something like Jameson, if you tasted Jameson in you know, a bottle that was bottled 3 years ago and a bottle that was bottled yesterday, you should see very little difference, because the whole idea is that the blender will blend out differences and blend in what needs to be blended in. Whereas with this, it's a lot more work has been done by the barrels, from where this difference is embraced when you have a whiskey like this. Hopefully that explains it. So what are the ages of the different barrel types in Blue Spot? What are the ages? Gosh. Not sure I actually know that.
As you were saying, it's kind of 7 to 20, just in different proportions. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
In there, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know the contribution of the Madeira is about 30% of the cask, but the ages, I'm not 100%. I know exactly what they are. Honestly, I don't know is the answer. I may have it in my notes somewhere, but I'm just racking my head now, and I can't think of what the ages of the individual casks that go mix the casks that go in to make up the whiskey are. I'm sorry about that. I don't actually know. You can shoot me after.
I think you've given enough knowledge now so far that you're allowed not know one, I believe, out of 100.
Yeah, I know that the sherry casks are, in around the sherry butts are in around between the 9 and 11 years age, but I'm not sure. All I know is it's like 7 to 20 odd years old. So basically, that is a wonderful tasting through. I'm fired. Oh God. Oh dear. My daughter said that to me earlier as well.
Oh no. That's strike two. For anyone asking, can you buy cask strength bottles? I've never seen any. No, there is no Blue Spot available at the moment. There are various ways. For example, Ali, our managing director, will try to source from around. If there's any markets that haven't taken their full allocation or sold their full allocation, he will try to get them in. Sometimes at a higher price, unfortunately, but that's what it will cost to import in. So definitely watch this space, but generally speaking, it's hard to know, until the next batch arrives. Whenever that might be. Yeah, well,
it definitely will be in the next 6 months. There will be another batch of Red Spot. Blue Spot probably not till I would say, at a guess, it's probably going to be September or something like that. Again, it's down to when the whiskey's ready to be bottled, and they're not going to compromise and just put it into a bottle because they're under pressure to get their hands, they won't compromise on quality. So unfortunately, we'll all have to wait till it's ready, as in it's fully mature, or they feel it's ready to be bottled.
For sure. There's a question there about is it part of is it a regular release, or is it just around for a couple of years or released?
No, it's there's stock laid down for the future. No, it's here to, it's part of the, as I said, the family's back. It's part of the lineup now. So I suppose your core range is now your green, yellow, red, and Blue Spot, and then your wine geese whiskies, which is currently there is the Chateau Leoville Barton and the Chateau Montolina, and then hopefully some more in the future when they have time to release those.
Yeah, and I'm just actually curious myself, what was everyone's favorite? Generally speaking, I tend to ask that whenever I host tasting. And there we go. Already Martin's in red number 1.
I'd go with that. I'd go with that too. Yeah.
And Leoville Barton was last. No, I stick by it. Couple of votes for Yellow Spot there.
Yeah, Yellow Spot. You see, it's a cracker of a whiskey. Great price point too. And all of
Exactly.
these whiskies, bar Red Spot and Blue Spot, as Thomas said, are available from Celtic Whiskey.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's only because they're sold out, not no other reason than that.
No, like we take literally as much as we're allowed to. Obviously every store and every outlet has to have their allowance, and we take as much as we can. I've seen a lot of love for red, yellow, and Montelena. Not much for Leoville Barton. I'll get it. I'll make a change. See, Darren, our shop manager, he's a big Montelena fan, and I'm the Leoville Barton. But obviously, I've been voted out this evening.
So, just if you're, if you ever want to get in touch with me, or if you want to give us a follow on social media, my Instagram is at Ger Garland, or on Twitter at Ger Middleton, or on Facebook, Ger Garland on Facebook as well. So, if I can be of any help to any of you, please give me a shout any time. And also, I usually post up if there's new releases coming down the line, information about them, and just some of my whiskey travels as well. In the past I was doing a lot more, but now it's mainly on or tag me if you're putting anything up tonight. Tag me at Ger Garland, or that would be great. So I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. We had almost 100 people at one stage here this evening.
Wow.
And that's a great start to the year. Goes to show you there's a lot of love out there for the Spot range.
Thank you, Thomas and Celtic Whiskey, for organising this brilliant tasting. I really enjoyed it, and thank you to all of you for spending an hour or so enjoying some great whiskey. So hopefully it wasn't too much hassle for you.
No, thanks very much, Ger, for joining. And obviously, the tasting's nothing without the knowledge to back it up. It's always good to know the backstory behind the whiskies you're tasting. So thanks very much, and thanks everyone for joining. All the guys who are logging off, and thanks very much for joining. Yeah. So unless there's any more questions, I think we've all enjoyed our whiskies. Now it's time to put the head down. Right.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys. Bye now.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.